Alex Logan, the co-founder and CEO of Cecil. Thanks so much for being the latest subject of my very bad habit on LinkedIn of randomly hitting people up to come on my podcast.
It's a pleasure. I don't get too many of them, so it's nice to be on here.
It's amazing. And it's also meaningful because, as we were discussing in the lead up to this, I have a bad habit of linking guests together over threads through several episodes. So we're back into the Nature Metrics thread. Some former victims here were Gillian Malod, who talked about her experience at MSCI. She now works at the Intercontinental Exchange Company. We also talked about Flint Pro in another episode. So some good coverage, and yeah, great to have you on expanding coverage of this thread with Cecil, Alex.
It's good in good company. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Then maybe I should just hit you with a question about any reflections you might have actually on those former guests and any highlights from your knowledge of any of those solutions or even individuals.
I think one comment would be, particularly in this space, it's going to take a combination of a lot of different skill sets actually, and from what you've described there, I think that hits home on a couple of different fronts, and actually even just in designing the organization that I've built with the team around me, that's been an ongoing challenge. And what I mean by that, to be specific, is environmental science is an emerging science, and that's a science that we're still learning stuff every single day about how nature works. And therefore, I think it's really important to have an appreciation for the ongoing applied science that's going to happen within this space. And then you think about the combination of that with spatial data scientists and geo, and how important that's going to be to understanding nature. And then you're also talking about a whole new market getting created. So I guess my comment on that would be appreciation that you're actually talking to a lot of the different people that are going to need to come together here and work through collaboration and partnerships to solve what is a pretty hairy problem in understanding nature, and then also building opportunities for nature to thrive in the future too.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's a nice lead in, really, to starting with the origins of Cecil. Okay. So could you give us a bit of commentary around that?
Yeah. So what Cecil is today is quite different to what me and my co-founder built on day one of Cecil about 4.5 years ago. So when we first started, our target audience were teams that were building projects in nature-based solutions. So we were partnering with teams that are doing soil carbon programs across Australia, afforestation and reforestation in the UK, protected, improved forest management across the US. And what we saw for them initially was that they were very underserviced by technology. So there's a lot of your classic doing things in spreadsheets, having to manage pretty detailed processes, and therefore we built a more traditional software platform for them. So an application, a web app, where they could bring all of their information into one place. What we found by onboarding a lot of those teams was two things. Firstly, it started to turn out to be a product very similar to Asana or something you might use for project management. So it became difficult for us to justify really, I guess, selling against some of those horizontal tools. And that led us to sort of moving away from diving into that model and building out that software product. But at the same time, when we were building that software, we started to think about, we started to have challenges and therefore think about overcoming those challenges more broadly around getting access to data. So when we first had that software product, we had the intention of bringing in digital monitoring and verification, mostly from satellite imagery, for a lot of these projects. And at that time, despite having very capable software engineers on our team, there was no APIs to integrate with. The best we could do is get an iframe into that software to actually get one layer, which wasn't really meaningful enough. So that led to a bit of a transition and a pivot for us as a business to actually solve that problem ourselves. We felt like there were other teams out there who wanted an API to get access to all of these nature data sets, and therefore there was a gap for us to sort of fill. And that's led us to where we are today and the work that we do today. It's a very different looking product. Our audience is very different. It's gone from being operations team members and folks that are building out carbon projects to data scientists and software engineers and people that are looking to build applications to support reporting and monitoring and verification of a lot of these restoration projects.
You now have a team of data scientists where before it was more project-based work. Is that right?
So I think our audience, so the people that we serve are data scientists and software engineers, whereas previously the people that were logging into the web app that we built were project developers and others. So I think where we're sort of getting to now is the pivot away from building software and building a web app to building a data platform, which services data scientists and software engineers. So that's our pivot away from what we were originally building and sort of going into now, I guess, what we saw as an opportunity and then what we've solved. So it leads into talking about the challenges of before Cecil versus after Cecil.
Okay, so I was actually having a bit of a discussion about this episode with my wife last night, and she kept asking me all these detailed questions. I was like, hang on, I need to actually record the episode before I can answer. But she was fascinated, and I think a lot of us are fascinated to know that nature matters enough, that there are data scientists whose job it is to deal with feeds of data about nature. That I just love that we can talk about that, and it's really nice that humanity has reached that stage. But it brings up the issue of what on earth is a data feed about nature? It sounds a bit woolly. So have you got any specific, is it species? Is it locations? Is it forests? Is it ponds? How can I give that extra detail to my wife to satisfy her curiosity and the rest of the audience? Because it's not just my wife that is the audience for this podcast. Believe it or not, it might be. Who knows?
I feel like I either when I'm sitting at a dinner party at the moment, people either shut down from wanting to discuss this, or I get like deeply curious people. Like it sounds like your wife is in that category. So yeah, look, this was actually a big challenge for us on where to start. I mean, when you say that from Cecil's perspective, we talk a lot about making nature data more accessible. And like the first question you should probably ask is, what is nature data? and then where do you start if you're going to make it more accessible? So I guess just talking a little bit about our journey of how we found a starting point for that answers the question a little bit, but it's extremely expansive. So for us, I guess there was a little bit of incoming bias. So we had been working with a lot of nature-based solutions teams who were doing forestry, and therefore they care about trees, right? And having data on trees is nature data. So we essentially started there, again, with a little bit of incoming bias. It's actually been really important for us to stay focused on that for a long period of time. And in fact, when we decided on that being what we describe as our first scientific concept, was actually over 18 months ago. And we've only just recently moved out of above ground biomass or plant biomass or trees, whichever one you want to use as the descriptor there, into land use and land cover. So we actually were quite thoughtful about choosing trees and plant biomass as a starting point. Now, there are some benefits to that. A lot of nature actually moves around, and I've personally never seen a tree stand up and run into a different place. So we've probably been avoiding some of the challenges that will come up in some ways by focusing on trees. And there's also a maturity around observing trees through satellites and other remote sensing technologies. So for us, it's been a combination of prioritizing with things that we know people care about and are measuring. And in that case, a lot of forestry, or agroforestry or afforestation. So there was a need to monitor these trees. The technology is mature enough, albeit there are still limitations around using remote sensing in combination with ground truth data, but there's some maturity around the technology. And that sets us up to really hone in, work with data providers, and then bring a solution to the market, ultimately is what we've looked to do. Now, for us, the way in which we expand is by moving into additional scientific concepts. So scientific concepts from an environmental science perspective. So we have a science team that are thinking deeply about what additional concepts we would bring in addition to plant biomass or trees. So where that has started is land use and land cover, which are different concepts but are quite closely correlated. And then we're also thinking about biodiversity. I mean, breaking that down into what do you mean by biodiversity? Is that species? I mean, the list goes on, and there's a lot of interesting technology now coming out about measuring biodiversity. We've also got camera traps, eDNA, those types of things. So, I mean, there's a long roadmap ahead of us, but if you come back to it, Cecil is really only focused on terrestrial ecosystems and then plant biomass, and then starting to expand out into land use and land cover, mostly in a terrestrial ecosystem context, and then into other concepts beyond that. So I don't really know if that answers the question necessarily, but it gives you a framework to the complexities and the thoughtfulness that has to come with defining what you're looking at, and not just looking at what technology can do, but actually how that links back to the questions that people are asking about nature at the moment as well.
For sure. We need to be working backwards from customer needs for fear of losing our business altogether. Yeah. All right. And good to know that this principle in business applies even when nature metrics is involved. So if I could stick with the trees for a sec. So I guess because in geospatial, right, we think pretty quickly about the database behind the picture or the map that we make or the dashboard that we put in front of people. And when we talk about data, especially in the context of monitoring, immediately one thinks of some sort of a sensor network. Have you got them, stuck on the tree somewhere in the ground? I mean, I'm thinking about, soil moisture monitors, things like that. How are you getting a data feed about the trees, or is it not a feed?
Yeah, so the way in which we have approached this is Cecil is a certain, so the teams that we interact with are looking for data on trees, right? And if you work back from that, there are a lot of great data providers that exist out there that are working on this. And one of the things that we observed was that there's no silver bullet, right? So by partnering with multiple data providers that are delivering variables about canopy cover, canopy heights, above ground biomass, that's really the role that we're trying to do in connecting these teams with more data providers, in aggregating into those data providers into one place. So to answer your question, we don't have any of the sensors out there. We're partnering with teams like Planet, who have an awesome forest carbon team, which is actually a team that was acquired by Planet called Cecil Sciences, led out by David and Christopher. And then we partnered with Chloris Geospatial, which have a really rich background in the academic community and also across broader financial markets. And then the team of Canop. So these are the teams that are building these above ground biomass models by bringing together a lot of different sensor networks. In the case of Planet, you're obviously using Planet Scope as well as an input. So derived data sets are what we are getting from this collection of providers. And what our role is really to make it easy to get access to one or many of those providers through one integration, as opposed to having to go to each of them yourself.
Okay, and so I've got here this note. So before state was that one had to, if you were interested in information about trees, search thousands of data sets and scientific papers. A lot of the time there was no documentation about what data sets you did find. The after state is that you have curated data sets, clear usage notes, and standard specification in this Cecil platform.
Yeah, so the stories that we were hearing from teams, and we still hear this today, is that a lot of folks that are asking questions about trees are actually working on areas of interest or plots in all different parts of the world. So you may find that you find a great partner who is producing above ground biomass data sets in Ghana for tree heights, and that works really well in that particular region of the world. And the next day, you might get asked by your manager, okay, we're doing a project in Australia on the other side of the world. There are different trees, there are different species. You probably can't use the same model that you were using in Ghana in Australia. So then this huge amount of work would kick off to actually go and do research about which data sets are available in areas in Australia, which ones perform well against ground truthing that you might have. So we were hearing of stories where people were spending 6 to 12 months just to enter a new region to understand what data sets they could use. So I wouldn't say that this is a solved problem from Cecil's perspective. We still have a lot of ambitious work to be done here, but ultimately what we're trying to do with our science team is help you more quickly understand the limitations and the opportunities with these data sets by giving clear usage notes, by giving easy access to documentation, so that you're well supported to make these decisions on what data sets to use where faster, rather than having to do that work yourself.
Okay, and I can cheekily connect you then to another thread. So we had Aya Data on the podcast a while ago, talking about their use of drones for Ghanaian farmers. So yeah, interesting. We've got multiple connections going on here. Yeah, sure. Another thing it goes on. So I can also connect you to an episode I recorded with Jed Sunbull about Radiant Earth. You're reminding me of Source Cooperative, which seems to be a more generic data marketplace or platform for sharing easily data.
Yeah, it is, and had the good fortune of being at the Cloud Native Geospatial inaugural, I guess. I think it was actually
so jealous.
The first big one at Utah recently. Look, I think that this actually breaks into another category, in my opinion, like moving a little bit away from the curation and development of data sets and actually just into this accessibility and interoperability problem that exists. And again, if you look back historically at geospatial data and spatial data in general, we've been on this, it's sort of all been building to this moment, in my opinion, for a long time. These are massive data sets, which 10 years ago, a lot of the developments were around optimizing for storage. But now, and I'm sure Jed would have mentioned this, like storage is almost commoditized in many ways. And what we're solving for now are the further downstream challenges of interoperability, quick, easy access to data sets. And I think that Source stands for that in such a meaningful way that anyone can go there, put things into object storage and make it very quickly accessible to other people. So I see us in a similar category. Probably the way in which we're building this out sits at a level above that for teams that, again, are looking for that additional level of clarity on how this data set performs well. I hope that there would be data sets on Source Cooperative that people could get access through Cecil. There will definitely be things that aren't on Source Cooperative that will be available through Cecil as well. So I see it all in a similar vein, that we're moving towards a world in which simplified access, standards are going to play a really important role in formats, so that a much broader audience can actually start leveraging spatial data. And I think we're just at such a critical stage where anyone with a data background or even less of a background, just a software engineer, can just start using this data in their workflows really, really quickly. And I think that's very exciting.
Yeah, perfect. You're removing the data collection and data management impediment to building. So yeah, it's vital, for us to meet the moment, really. I mean, if the likes of Gillian have appeared on the New York Stock Exchange to launch what we're going to discuss later on, it's if the world's largest pool of capital has the time to spend on nature metrics, it means or implies that the kind of effort you're talking about in Cecil is definitely necessary. All right, so there's another comment or prompt I'm going to give you for some elaboration from you. So a before state with regard to Cecil was ArcGIS, prescribed workflows and formats, and the after state was flexible data delivery for your workflow and tooling. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think this is similar to the point that I just made before, which is we're moving away from what I feel like was quite a lot of silos of data sitting in different systems towards a much more open world. And again, I think that source co-op bleeds into this as an opportunity and something that's breaking down that barrier. I guess historically, we have seen large organizations, no disrespect, but people like Esri creating file formats that keep people inside their ecosystem. And that's
you're not the only one with that thought. Land and expand, protect the beachhead, establish a beachhead, etc. Yeah.
But I think if we're going down that path as well, we've also seen efforts from cloud providers to do similar things. Google Earth Engine, Microsoft Computer, they're incredible initiatives that are promoting better and easier access to things. But there's misaligned incentives around cloud providers wanting to keep you in Azure or keep you in Google Cloud, like GCP, right? So I think we're moving now to a world where we're going to find better aligned incentives. Again, I've mentioned it multiple times, but Source Cooperative is in many ways a lighthouse when it comes to more aligned incentives around it not mattering where you put the data, you just need to get access to it and you just need to be able to use it. So I think, again, we're at this inflection point within spatial data that we're actually going to see just much more open usage of this. And another signal for this is Databricks, Snowflake, and others now handle geo much more natively. We're seeing GeoParquet now embedded into just Parquet. We're seeing these types of things happen every single week now, and it's becoming a lot more mainstream. And I think we should all be really excited about that.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's a really wonderful way to put it. Geospatial is becoming mainstream, and it's just another aspect. It's like dealing with a time field or a date field for a generic data scientist. Yeah. Okay, so here's another prompt. So a before state, again, with regard to Cecil, was 200K upfront quotas with restrictive rights, and an after state was usage-based pricing and open data. Can you expand?
Yeah, and I think that this lives in the realm of there's a broader conversation here around licensing of data, and we actually developed something called the Nature Data Sharing Initiative, in which we consulted a lot of indigenous and native land folks about what it would be like for their data to be used and what it means for data to be used downstream of people who are collecting it on the ground. So there's a whole discussion here, but the prompt itself is that previously the way in which this industry, and this is more specific in many ways to Earth observation, occurred was massive government contracts and military contracts. And therefore, I think we're dealing with a little bit of legacy for pricing when it comes to Earth observation data and a lot of spatial data, because people have built businesses out of $25 million contracts, $50 million contracts. And if you're not willing to, serve up $200,000, you can't even get started. And I think that's held back a lot of people that probably have very unique and useful use cases to actually get started. And I was in that situation when I was building the web app in the first iteration of Cecil. I didn't have $200,000 to pay to get started with a data set. I just wanted to start feeding some of this data into the application to experiment, understand whether or not that was going to get a good response from people. So an approach that we're taking at Cecil is that we're working really hard on licensing with a lot of our partners and trying to push through these barriers of minimum pricing, quotas, and just allow for a lot more flexible usage-based model. And to date, we've been, I would say, somewhat successful in that. And I have to give credit to a lot of the teams that we're partnered with who have allowed us to offer usage-based pricing. Now, this makes a massive difference when you think before the barrier, let's even call it $50,000 to get started with a global layer of above ground biomass. We're now enabling people to come in and pull 1,000 hectares at 10 cents per hectare. That's $10. Like, anyone can put their credit card down and get access to a world-class above ground biomass data set and start to experiment with that. And no doubt, the people who develop that, if they do scale up to millions of hectares, let them pay the millions of dollars. But we're going to enable so much innovation if we're able to get people in early and just start using that data.
Yep. Okay. Now, this is actually really inspiring to hear. It sounds like you're making some solid progress actually in smoothing the way for these really important analyses and insight about nature. So yeah, thanks, Alex. All right, so something I flagged before was one of the previous guests, Gillian Malod, who I actually had the privilege of meeting after that episode in Manhattan. She's a wonderfully generous woman and gave us a few tips about what it's like living in that city. So something she showed us a picture of was her appearing in the New York Stock Exchange for the launch of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. So I have to hear from you, given that you sound like you're far closer to the center of all of this than me. You're also in the same city, Alex. Could you tell us what it means for you that the New York Stock Exchange gives enough of a damn about nature to permit this kind of a launch in their building?
Yeah, well, I think this is often quite a new concept in some ways, but something that hits home to a much broader audience. And so I think one way of getting people up to speed on maybe how this has started to happen now is to actually look at what people are probably more familiar with, which is climate for enterprises and emissions. So the backstory to that, I mean, emissions and carbon markets have been around for a very long time, but there were a couple of crucial moments. Back in around 2015, we had the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures. We had the Paris Agreement, and that spurred on. It took time, but towards 2020, we started to hear a lot more about net zero commitments, and we started seeing corporates making commitments for 2030. And there's been, massive growth from the voluntary carbon market and regulated carbon markets. We're seeing a similar thing start to occur, and there's a lot of learnings and things that we can take as precautionary in thinking about nature in a similar way. But when at the New York Stock Exchange, I believe the event that you're probably talking about was one of the launches of the Task Force for Nature-Related Disclosures. So emulating a very similar thing to the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures. And therefore, hopefully it doesn't take as long, but a lot of corporates are now thinking about nature risk and about thinking about nature in a very different way because of that task force. So to double click on that a little bit, like what did we see with climate and then what are we seeing with nature as additional challenges? Well, one thing that was on the side of climate and emissions was there was a North Star metric. There was CO2 equivalent. Now, if you compare that to, and you could, I mean, some people argue that is fungible. I mean, it's still questionable. But then now if you think about that in the context of nature, there's no North Star metric for nature, which is going to mean that it's extremely challenging and probably not fungible, right? Like that like seems like a difficult task to get to.
Can I challenge you a bit on this idea? Because I really love this idea of a North Star metric for nature. My gut reaction is, well, it's pre-mechanized agriculture. It's pre the mass clearing of ancient woodlands.
Well, I think you're right, but even in your answer there, I think is where I would say the challenge lies, which is if you zoom in specifically to one patch, let's go back to Australia, which we both hail from. If you zoom into a patch of nature on agricultural land in Australia, that patch of land even a kilometer away, the way in which you would measure what good biodiverse ecosystem health looks like is very different. So if you're having an impact on this patch of land and you're measuring that, it's probably going to be hard to measure that with the same metric a kilometer down the road. So I think where the challenge lies is in the complexities of nature and being able to say, well, if you go down the path of credits, like biodiversity credits, how is one biodiversity credit from here that's been generated equal to this? It almost seems
What's
impossible.
the effort and time to generate the same credit in a different location? Okay, where
Yeah,
different
or like
species made.
if you made that land degraded here, is it fair that you restored the land over here, and is that an even balance from a
And there
crediting
might be a
perspective?
strategic approach that people take, a cynical approach where they destroy land that's hard to create biodiversity and replace it where it's incredibly easy to do it. Okay. Has geospatial foundation models as a concept raised its head at Cecil?
Yeah, well, it's happening all around us, I would say. And I'm excited by it because I think that what it provides a potential solution for is this challenge of generating new data sets really quickly, faster than we've ever generated them before. And what I mean by that is if you go back to some of the initiatives that have been very powerful over the last decade, an example of that would be Global Forest Watch, which is an amazing initiative developed by WRI and a lot of other people. When you look at the amount of resources that went into developing and continuing to maintain Global Forest Watch, they're very, very large. And actually, the team at Clay, who have now started Legend as well, were a very
related
big part
to
of
Jen Sunwall and Radiant Earth. Yep.
Exactly. So, look, the way that they articulate this, I think, is really powerful. And it is that we are now getting to a point where we can do a lot of that work in generating a really meaningful data set much faster, and also potentially be able to spin up new data sets very quickly and for different use cases. Going back to my point before, which is if you needed a new data set for wetlands or mangroves in the west coast of Australia, what would it look like to be able to get something up and running very quickly to understand that area of interest when something starts to peak? So I think I see massive opportunities for this technology in what I would describe as the generation of new data sets. Another team that's doing some fantastic work on this.
Hang on. Sorry to butt in. Are you saying synthetic data? Or are you saying integrating a new data source into Cecil?
Yeah, so the concept that I'm talking about is generating new data sets that could be made available through Cecil. So more synthetic data, vector embeddings, and looking at the speed from identification of, I want to understand canopy heights for this type of species in this part of Australia.
Oh, are you saying
and
deriving data from what's already accessible from Cecil? Sorry to butt in.
No, I guess to position this in a way is that Cecil arguably sits at the middle of the marketplace, right? And on one side, you have consumers of data who want really easy access to many data sets in the same format and be able to stream that into their applications. The other side is the data providers and the people that are generating new, let's call them raster data sets in most cases, which have are derived outputs of a lot of other inputs that exist. And the traditional way that those data sets are being generated is that you take a lot of different drone imagery, satellite imagery, you then train that, you then go and get more ground truthing data to test your model against. I think that process for data providers is going to radically change over the next 12 months.
Okay, with the emergence and exploitation of geospatial foundation models. Okay, really great to be able to link what you're doing to this, ever expanding theme in amongst many geospatial. Okay, I also wanted to give you I guess another prompt. So There's this podcast from BlackRock, a quote from their geospatial team leader that has stuck in my mind ever since I heard it. So basically, the service that his team provides to BlackRock, he said, is geospatial insight as the world turns. And to me, this is just such a powerful call to action and illustration of what we can offer the world as a discipline. So, I mean, surely nature metrics, there's some sort of participation in this insight as the world turns, because nature does literally change as the sun rises and sets.
Yeah, well, I think that as we discussed at the beginning of the podcast, this like nature data and nature metrics is such a broad category, and I think it's all encompassing. Like when if you think of Cecil starting with trees, and then you start to expand that out to all of nature data, like it's an extremely large category and extends into weather, it extends into oceans, it extends far beyond what we're even thinking about initially as Cecil doing. So there's a very long roadmap. And then if you think about all of that combined with not only just the temporal changes that literally come, as you say, as the day starts and ends, we're also just at the cusp of learning so much more about nature as well. So there are going to be new developments, new discoveries about nature that happen every day as well, that change our understanding of what we want to track and what each of these inferences might mean for an ecosystem. So I'm not really answering the question necessarily, but I
No,
fully
you are.
agree.
All of these reflections in response to the prompt development. Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit overwhelming when you think about it in that way, right? But if I were to come back and try to bucket it into things, I think again we need to stay really close to the scientific community and be responsive to new developments about what we learn and understand, particularly in unprecedented times, to be honest, where things are changing rapidly right in front of us. I think we need to be super close to that community. And I think in addition to that, the spatial data community needs to continue to push for collaboration and understanding that things from a scientific perspective are going to change. We are requiring very large amounts of data to come to the platform, which not everyone is necessarily familiar with how those scientific formats work. So we need to make that bridge to the teams at BlackRock. What are they really good at? Financial data, maybe some location data layered onto that. How do they think about multi-dimensional geotiffs being ingested into their traditional systems? Like that's going to take some change, and there needs to be some bridges between the financial community who have been somewhat exposed to this type of data in the past, but maybe not a core part of their stack. So we need to make that bridge across to those types of organizations as well, which there are some great companies doing that in the ecosystem like Earthmover and others. So yeah, I think
Ryan
there's a lot to
Abernathy,
be
he's a
done.
cool guy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really
yeah.
good guy, yeah.
Okay. I love how I feel like I've cracked the code a little bit, because a lot of the people that you're mentioning I've already met, or have had as guests on. Okay, amazing to have this commentary, Alex. It's a privilege. Um, I've got a personal question, if you don't mind me asking. So I understand you've made a move from Sydney to New York City recently. Why?
Well, I guess there are many ways of spinning this. One way is to say that my days are a lot more consistent from a work basis when I'm actually in New York. So my co-founder and I started Cecil back in Sydney during the middle of COVID, essentially. So we're sort of locked up in rooms, and it was somewhat acceptable to just take calls at any time when you were sort of locked up in a single room. And as time has gone on, I felt a pretty strong pull to the US. I think for multiple reasons. Building a technology company, I would argue there's not many better places in the world to build a tech startup. Whilst also a lot of just customers giving us pull from Europe. And there's a lot of new initiatives like what you spoke with Jed about, like EU deforestation regulation, that
Yes.
is meaning that people are asking those questions from a meaningful way in Europe. So that leads me to being able to be on the East Coast, which means that in the mornings I can speak with Europe, and then I can
Exactly.
speak with the rest of the US during the day. So that's the work answer. I think through privilege and opportunity, I'm at a point in life where me and my wife actually just want to like sort of throw ourselves headfirst into learning. She's a head of engineering at a health tech startup. I'm running Cecil at the early stages. It's a time over the next 5 years where we just want to throw ourselves into creative thinking, building companies, and I think New York is a pretty phenomenal place to do that. So we've found ourselves here as that sort of reason.
Yeah, yeah. My wife and I have gone through a similar sort of vetting process and trying to figure out what our life in the US is going to be. So yeah, I want to see how it's been for you, and I think others will have some curiosity too about the move and what it's like. Okay, I've got just one more whilst I have you. So. And forgive me for anthropomorphizing nature a bit here in this question, but I am at a embryonic stage in my thinking about this concept, so it's the best I can do. Um, is there a possibility that nature can speak to us through a geospatial foundation model that inhales all that Cecil can deliver once Cecil is fully built out?
Well, I think one thing that you made me think of with that question is there's this very cool company that I had the fortune of meeting the co-founder, who it's called Electric Plant, and they've developed. Have you heard of
I
them?
love this name. Electric plant, that's awesome.
I'm pretty sure I quoted it right. I'm gonna be disappointed in myself if that's wrong. I'm pretty sure it's Electric Plant. And the basically the research that they did was that plants have feelings and respond to things, and you can actually I'm going to be way out of my depth in describing this, but you can listen to their response to things through a neural network, as I understand it, having a device connected to the plant. Again, I'm butchering this, but they can pick up and understand how that plant is responding to certain things. The example that like I think it goes much further than this. I think they've got hundreds of metrics that they get back off these plants now. But like you do see responses from plants to certain weather conditions, to certain climatic aspects of what's going on around them, and they've pinpointed that to be able to pick that up. So that side note, that's potentially someone who you should have on the on the podcast if it starts going down this direction, which through this we seem to be doing. I think I mean I guess that's kind of the to answer your question, like that's the vision behind Cecil, is that we have a better understanding and a better valuing of nature, and I think it's important to do both parts of that. So better understanding, I keep coming back to this, but for us to appropriately adjust and adapt to a very changing ecosystem around us, we have to continue to be hungry to understand nature more and more as we look to adapt to what the future holds for us. And then alongside that, if you better understand it, how can we, and I think this is part of the opportunity around corporates thinking about this, actually value nature on the balance sheets and think about that. I think, sadly, I think that'll start to happen more frequently because of the risk exposure that companies have to massive events happening across their supply chain. But
accompanied
whatever
by
it
the
takes,
degradation of nature and, for example,
exactly.
trees on slopes stabilizing them against erosion. Yes.
So, like we may find that these challenging events lead it to being a lot higher up on the CEO's list of risks associated with what could happen to their organization. But yes, I hope that through the company that we're building, I think we're a very modest starting point to that, and there's a lot of work to be done. But if we end up in a world where we better understand and value nature, I think there would be a lot of positive things around that outcome of that vision.
From nature as a rival to nature as a partner. Thanks, Alex, for showing us how Cecil is helping bring that about.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I apologize for pivoting your podcast into a nature podcast.
Just when I pivoted from the Geospatial Index to Geospatial FM, well, that lasted 3 episodes. I paid a lot of money for that domain. So you said, Alex, you've got some docs about Cecil to throw up on screen for us. Feel free to step us through.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess going all the way back to the beginning of the podcast, this was quite a big transition for us. Like the first product that we built at Cecil was a traditional web app. You get a login, you log in, you start seeing things. It's actually made demos in some ways a little more difficult for me, but I've sort of found a way to talk about stuff. So what I'm going to just bring up is Cecil's documentation. This is going to give you a good sense of what exists in the platform today, and if you're interested in exploring it, how you'd be able to do that. So the first thing is we've talked a lot about curation of data sets. So we're on a journey now where we're starting to catalog the data sets that are on Cecil. So what you'll see here is, as I've mentioned a few times, we started with plant biomass. So typically the variables that come back from those data sets are above ground biomass, tree heights, canopy cover. And they come at, I guess they're all global data sets in this case, but they come with different spatial resolution. So ranging from 30-meter spatial resolution down to 3.5. They have different temporal coverage and different resolution. So again, trying to make it easier for people very quickly to understand, oh, I need analysis from 2007. This is the data set that potentially I would be able to use. When you dive into these docs, you start to see where our science team delves into a lot of the documentation usage notes to maybe look at some of the limitations of why this may or may not work to you, for you. So that's one aspect of Cecil. I guess to talk about how it actually works, we have this getting started page, which you can very quickly install the SDK. You then create an area of interest to give us a polygon somewhere around the world in which you want to analyze with these data sets. And then you can, with a couple of lines of code, acquire nature data sets. So you give us the AOI ID, a dataset ID, and then you make that request. We go away and do the background process of getting the data from the provider. And then that comes back in to our database. There's a couple of spatial functions that you can run against that. Data providers do deliver data on different coordinate reference systems and a different spatial resolution. So we allow you to reproject and also up or down sample on the resolution.
Oh, you do that on your platform. That makes these important basic spatial analyses so much easier. That's really great.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that a lot of teams have is that by no fault of data providers, they're storing or delivering data on a different coordinate reference system, and therefore, once you get that, it's not joinable between different providers. So yeah, with we call it a transformation with, again, a couple of lines of code. When you make that data request, you can also put a transformation on that so that when you do actually do the spatial analysis, you can join those data sets. So with this example here, we're looking at, I think it's mean canopy cover between 2 providers, and you can produce a raster out of that. You can do data frame operations. So Cecil sits at that layer to try to simplify the use of multiple data sets from different providers, do that normalization and allow you to access it. And it comes packaged as a Python SDK, but actually what sits below that is an API, which allows you to request data sets, run those transformations, and a database. So we deliver that in the database for you to have as part of your existing workflow. So we have teams integrating that into applications or pipelines that allow them to do analysis downstream.
Hang on, are you saying you get a cut of the data? You don't get a live connection then?
So typically the It's a good question. So when we first make a request, let's use a specific example, right? So Planet has a forest carbon monitoring data set, 3.5 meter resolution, goes back to the year 2021. So when you make your first request for Planet's monitoring data set, you give us an AOI. So essentially you are clipping to one or many AOIs that you have. And we send that request to them, we get the data back, and we deliver the clipped data to you just for your area of interest with all the variables that are delivered from Planet all the way back for the multiple years and quarters that they have that data for. So you actually get a full archive at that point. So it's super neat to be able to look at time series and be able to see what trends are over time. And then they have a quarterly updates. So on that quarterly update, when that new data is produced by them, we bring that data into Cecil for you. So you are effectively creating a subscription at that point. And when the new data is introduced from Planet, it comes into that database so that you have access to the new data as well as the archive of what
you're using before. An AOI to subscribe to change or to nature information in a location. This idea of subscribing to a spot on the earth actually came up in the episode with Skyfi when I interviewed the CEO, Luke Fisher. They're basically a marketplace for all manner of Earth observation data. I don't know if you've heard of them, but he also talked about customers being able to essentially subscribe to returns from any satellite that passed over that spot on the Earth.
Yeah, very similar concept. So big fan of the Skyfi team, and they've, I guess, carved out, well, it's not even a niche anymore. It's a very big business. But you can think of us in a similar light, but we have a very specific niche doing the same thing for nature data sets. So you're subscribing to a particular area of interest or many areas of interest, and then you're pulling in data from these different nature data sources for that area of interest.